knowledges and lands. I will return to that term, a few slides down the road, because it kind of symbolizes and expresses the responsibility that we have individually and collectively to the lands that are, for thousands of years, have been stewarded by Indigenous peoples with various kinds of ownership and access. And so, as I always do, I would like to, in the very beginning, acknowledge the elders that for many years I've worked with. Winachumyis Gokstepguch, how a toich sut noon, Masi Jo Gunalstish, Ye ene Chukes Ilch, de Secwepemc de Gechtesi is Slachmems, es ye ene Schlakmelden. So I just wanted to say this was in Secwepemc Nation, which is my home language in the interior of British Columbia, that I wanted to acknowledge the elders who have taught me, have taught my students also for many decades. Sadly, many of them have left us now, and there's fewer and fewer of what we call birth speakers, elders in our different nations that have lived on the land and speak the language for all the kind of processes and events of colonization that I think we all know about. So here, just a little bit of a recap on myself. I was raised in Northwest Germany in a Plattdeutsch, Niederdeutsch, and Saterlandsk speaking community, what they over there call a European minority language. And that kind of shaped my way of thinking from a very early age on. And I was raised very multilingually, subsequently with German, English, French, Spanish, and eventually Indigenous languages. As a young person, I came to Canada and then started doing my PhD, actually initially master's and then PhD research in the Haida community of Masset in Haida Gwaii off the northwest coast of British Columbia, and was there adopted by who became my mother, Sandalne Emma Matthews, and by my uncle, Lana Stung, Adam Bell, and they gave me the name Gulkilket. And it led to a lifelong connection in kinship, but also in research to that community and ongoing documentation of Hatkil, the northern dialect of Haida. And I've lived in Skeetchestn in the Secwepemc Nation, one of our 17 communities, since 1989, as wife, mother, community member, and as researcher, where through Simon Fraser University, I continued to live and work in the university. And I was given the name Stukoloch by our beloved auntie, Dr. Mona Jules, a number of years ago, and I carry that with honor to this day. And over those last 35 or so years, I've carried out collaborative research with all 17 of our communities that has involved language documentation of Secwepemc Nation, our Indigenous language, of oral histories, story work, ethnobotany, and ethnoecology. And as I said, and as Francesca mentioned in the very beginning, I'm a professor in the Department of Linguistics and First Nation Studies, actually now Indigenous Studies, at SFU. And so that's just a little bit more about myself. Normally, I would get somebody else to do that. And as Francesca already did, in both the Haida and Secwepemc community, as in many other Indigenous communities, you don't usually tell about yourself and toot your own horn, but somebody else does that for you. So a little bit more about the term geënsket. It means something along the lines that reckless behavior will make the sky and the land turn on you. And it provides a moral compass of engaging with land and resources on the land through language. The paragraph here is a quote that came from my husband, Kukpe or Chief Ron Ignace, and elders in our communities. Geënsket means that it is our role as Secwepemc to protect the integrity of our homeland. The long-lasting impacts of careless resource extraction with environmental, geological, hydrological, health, and cultural impacts severely compromise our ability to act as yuchminmen, caretakers of the land, and would challenge our responsibility according to Secwepemc law to act in that manner. According to the principle of geënsket, the land will inevitably turn on those who harm it. Geënsket also means that guests who come into our land and irresponsibly harm the land are in violation, in deep violation of the obligation they have to our land as guests. And our chiefs and elders actually used that statement about 12 years ago when we were voicing our opinion against a large mining company wanting to set up a huge strip mine for gold in the core of our territory, and where it turned out that this was a place of really deep spiritual, historical, cultural significance to our people, and that should not be recklessly exploited in that manner. You've probably, as biocultural researchers with interests in language, have seen these kind of statements that I've got on this slide around the connection between language, culture, knowledge, and biodiversity. The first quote here that I represent is from Dr. Lorna Onesta Williams, and it's on one of the walls at the entry to the Indigenous Languages Commission of Canada in Ottawa. And the way she summarized that connection between language, land, and knowledge experience is you're not learning a word, you're learning a world. Language reclamation is about expanding the diversity of our knowledge because language is an expression of the accumulated experiences of people. Those who do revitalization work say that biodiversity and knowledge diversity are one and the same. It is work that makes our world better. Some years ago, the linguistic ecologist Peter Muehlhäusler reminded us life in a particular human environment is dependent on people's ability to talk about it. And it's a fairly simple sentence, but if you think about it, we can only talk about the kind of things that we see, experience, but if we can no longer experience them either because of environmental changes and whatever comes with that, we can no longer talk about it in the same way that we can if that environment is in front of us. Of course, that connection between language, land, experience, and knowledge has been recognized by Indigenous language speakers, elders, and learners who have always acknowledged that those things are inseparably connected. A few years ago, in 2010, I was talking with my elders in my community, Skeetchestn, about how they perceived that connection between language and land and well-being. And this is how they then spontaneously started talking about it. And these are kind of the sentences they coined. Our land gave us our language. If we don't have our land, we lose our language. If we let that happen, we will become poor. We will suffer, whatever happens. Let's not forget that. We thank the land for raising and sustaining us. And of course, that also kind of became a bit of a mantra for encouraging young people and not so young people who didn't have who weren't able to be raised in the language to reclaim it, to bring it back. So the approach that myself and some of my co-researchers and elders are taking to this is what Secwepemc Ignace Ron termed walking on two legs. You probably have come across the term two-eyed seeing as a way to, as it's often called, integrate a Western and an Indigenous perspective on seeing, perceiving things, and expressing them. We even have three-eyed seeing now. And walking on two legs is in that vein. It's an action-oriented approach to engage with Indigenous knowledges and Western knowledges to make change. We don't so much look at it as being able to integrate them because we are keenly aware that they exist in a power imbalance. But nonetheless, it's up to us as researchers and Indigenous community members to dialogue those two knowledges and also to be guided by an Indigenous worldview as we do that, a moral compass, the principles of respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. And it's a way also of reclaiming Indigenous knowledge, the role and place that it has, but also its details and the amazing amount of knowledge that our ancestors, for example, in Secwepemc territory, developed over 10,000 years of living there. And last not least, it's ethical, accountable, and reciprocal. So ethical, accountable, and reciprocal Western science can be an ally to advance Indigenous stewardship and restoration. We have examples from many parts of the world where anthropologists, linguists, and other researchers have collaborated with local Indigenous peoples to record that kind of important local knowledge. My colleague and friend, Professor Anvita Abbey from India, worked for decades with Andamanese speakers in the Gulf of Bengal and found that on the heels of the devastating Indian tsunami of 2004, it was the traditional knowledge of Andamanese people who knew which trees to save themselves into, what to do based on landforms, vegetation, and all that, and thus saved thousands of lives at that time. I'm just going to skip through this pretty quickly here. The role that in Western science and collaborative science, traditional ecological knowledge plays, as defined by Berkey's back in 1993. Myself Dr. Nancy Turner and Ron, my husband, added the term wisdom to that as embodying not only knowledge, but also the wisdom that comes out of cumulative experience. Robin Wall-Kimmerer called tech an intellectual partner to Western sciences, and Louisa Maffei in 2005 stipulates increasing recognition of the value of tech or tech W and how it is developed, encoded, and transmitted through language. And we have also, through UNESCO and other bodies of the United Nations, the recognition of local and indigenous knowledge systems. So, turning to our Secwepemc ancient Skeetchestn, those are old oral histories. And we know from our own oral histories that climate change is nothing new. And it's the same way with indigenous knowledges in many other parts of the world. Ancient oral histories actually provide us with some clues. When the ethnographer James Tate, who came to our communities in about 1900, asked elders at the time, what do your stories tell you, and what has been kind of transmitted that you know or are aware of? What was life like for the long ago ancestors that you had? And they all remember being told about a time of great winds, heat, drought, and fire, of floods, not human-caused events, though. And this actually characterizes the what scientists call the xerothermic paleoclimate in interior British Columbia between about 11,000 and 7,000 before present. And fires in the landscape were a feature that perhaps was harnessed as long ago as about 5,000 years ago. And great winds, temperatures about 3 degrees above what we have now. Drought, vegetation was quite different during that time. The wetter Douglas fir forests did not exist yet. We had pine trees, open grasslands, and so on. So those early memories and the early stories about the land take place in that kind of environment. And if we want to represent the traditional ecological knowledge of Secwepemc peoples, of other indigenous peoples in our part of the world, we have at the core of it the philosophy and worldview, the respect to all beings on the land, the notion that these are ancestral lands, that all relationships with land and its beings are reciprocal and interactive, and that there is spirituality and power among all beings. And then we have ways of communicating and exchanging knowledge that address all of those. The classification of animals and plants and the nomenclature, the knowledge of the landscape, the telling in oral histories, traditions, and stories of things that transpired on the land, the ceremonies and customs that cyclically we celebrate for renewal and for persistence, the everyday discourse about what we do on the land, but also in oratory, and the trade among nations, among communities, expressing the knowledge in dreams and visions, often about the interconnections, and experiential learning by doing, learning by teaching the next generation, but also understanding and knowing the ecological principles and indicator species, environmental succession, environmental modification, taking practical inventory and monitoring the harvesting strategies that we have to enhance and preserve the growth of plants and to create forage for animals. But also that these are adaptable systems. Last not least, the knowledge of climate and seasons that plays an important role in that. So this is a diagram from the book that myself and Nancy Turner edited back in 2016 about Secwepemc people and plants. Another way to express that interaction between people and environment is that at the core of it are what we call the laws that we have about how those things came into being, how they continue to exist, and give us the deeds to the land. And the notion of these are the ancient laws, is different from the kind of advice that people give when something goes wrong about how it needs to be corrected. This notion or this term of I was originally told by this elder here, the late Louisa Basil from Skeetchestn, and she was talking about the markings of our ancestors in pictographs, sometimes in markings on the land left by transformers that had changed energy into matter to then leave markings on the land about things that had gone on. Sometimes we have them as rocks and other formations, the place names that we have on the land, and last not least, the narratives or stories that tell us about past events on the land. And they speak to the deeds in the sense of actions and events that took place in the ancient past. But those deeds also give legitimacy to Secwepemc ownership of the land and occupation of Secwepemc, which is Secwepemc territory. So in the same sense that in the sort of Western European, North American way, we have deeds to land that are given through papers, the papers that go with nowadays the kind of fee simple title. It was those markings on the land left by people a long time ago that provide the deeds to current generations to be on that land, to own it, but then also to look after it and not be reckless. And so interestingly, in the Secwepemc language, the term "stkai" expresses the idea as markings, but then as Louisa said it, it's our law as well. And it connects to rights. And more recently, it came to be used as a term for paper, because in the 1800s, our elders and ancestors perceived that the incoming settlers were showing their entitlement to land through the papers that they mentioned and that they were in possession of. And we have similar concepts in other languages. So, for example, in Coast Tsimshian, Somalgiach, the term ayauch expresses a similar kind of state. Ayauch is the ancient law of Tsimshian people situated on the northwest coast of British Columbia, With principles for spiritual, social, political, and economic relations, the Ayao has been taught both directly and indirectly in daily and ceremonial living for centuries, according to Patricia Joan Vickers. And likewise, in my other home in Haida society in Hatkil or Haida Kill, that term of Haida law also exists with its foundational principles around the legitimacy of occupation, proper human social conduct, conduct on the land and sea, and the teachings and sanctions that enforce this. And that foundational principle is expressed as Yahkudang, the dimension of Haida law sanctioning behavior guided by reciprocal accountability among all beings and powers. And Yahkudang expresses the fitness for respect that a person, by honoring those principles, shows. And if something needs to be adjusted or straightened, we use the term kilyahta, you do right, just right with words, or give the right and proper advice, so that that kind of balance can be maintained. And this is my uncle Kuyang, Claude Jones, who kept reminding us that Haida stories around the lives and events in different clans, matrilineal clans, express Haida laws as strict laws that humans need to abide by. And back to Secwepemc values that go with these laws. When a really important point here is the relational accountability and reciprocal relations that guide all things that we do, including hunting and fishing, gathering plants, and all the different kind of things that traditionally provided us with a living. And the fundamental idea behind this here is that humans are poor or pitiful, conquant, unless plants, animals, and fish offer themselves, kuchmanchut. Thus, we have the duty to thank them, to respect, protect, and honor them. And so it's when somebody goes hunting or fishing, it's not that it's only their skill that allows them to catch a fish or bag an animal, but it's the animal itself that is seen as kuchmanchut, as giving themselves. And that then in turn requires a respectful relationship of thanking to that animal and to all the other animal beings on the land. And we have, through many stories, that show us the consequences of when somebody is reckless or is vain or self-serving. This is a coyote story of where he had gathered up, caught a whole bunch of salmon and was drying them, and he was going to invite all people on the land as guests to come to a big gathering and feast. But as he was preparing the things he was going to feast his guests with, he started swearing at the salmon when they got caught up in his fur on the drying racks. And the salmon then came back to life. The fish eggs came back to life. The fish oil came back to life, and they all swam back into the river. And so there wasn't much he could do to give that great feast that would improve his prestige and status. Those relationships are also eminent in kin-centric ideas and notions. The term selknaus, be relatives to one another, is often mentioned. And the lady on the left here, the late Laura Harry from Esquette, she often mentioned as the salmon are our first children. And so because they're our first children, it's our job to look after them, to protect them. And likewise, it's about how knowledge is constituted. This is the late Nellie Taylor, one of my teachers and elders. And she explained that long time ago, people looked after the land and knew the animals and plants, everything in it. And that's why they had plenty to fish, deer to hunt, plants for food and medicine, and so on. But she also reminded us that it didn't come from nowhere. Each generation had to practice for it, learn about it, learn what all those different animals and plants are up to, how they behave, what their characteristics are, how they live on different parts of the land. And it was only once they had acquired that knowledge that the humans were able to look after it. And it was important to share one another's knowledge. That's how they learned and built up their understanding. What knowledge they shared had to be exact, she said. So it's this whole idea that you don't just behave any old way on the land, but you carefully practice from an early childhood on. You enhance your knowledge. You build new knowledge by sharing what you know with others, understanding what they know. And in that process, just like with the diagram I was showing you about traditional ecological knowledge, it's kind of like a spiral. On the one hand, it's cyclical, but on the other hand, it grows over time in the human lifetime of individuals, but also the much longer lifetime of people in society. And we also have examples of what happens when the language declines and when the land declines, and what happens to the knowledge in the language, but also what happens uh, when that knowledge in the language can no longer exist because the land itself has been destroyed and changed. One example of that is in the interior of British Columbia. A good portion of our land in the lower elevations is grasslands. And we have and then as you go higher up, you get into the Douglas fir forest and montane spruce forest and so forth. And we have 4 species of grouse that dwell between the grasslands and the higher up regions, blue or sooty grouse, sesok, spruce grouse, we have Franklin's grouse, sunach, and sharp-tailed grouse in the grasslands closer to the river valleys, and a few years ago, when I was working on bird knowledge with the elders in my community, um, we were remembering the terms for the different uh, species of grouse. And there are additional terms for males and females and for when they do their mating calls and so forth. And the one they couldn't remember anymore was the term for sharp-tailed grouse, because they disappeared from our environment beginning about 100 years ago. They're now a red-listed species. And so with the ability to still actually hunt and live in those grasslands uh, because of mining and urban development and a number of factors, then the name for the animal itself no longer was there at people's tip of their tongue. Uh, Another one that exists among elders still, the oldest ones anyway, as the traditional knowledge involves Saskatoon berries. Uh, in English, they're a single species, Amelanchier alnifolium, and we distinguish three different types or varieties. The one on the left here is Pakpaka'ui, ordinary berries in translation, or real berries. The one in the middle, Stachum, which grows in drier side hills, gullies type of habitats. And there's a third variety, Synhuesesp, that translates as something like the best and most plentiful berry. That's restricted to a couple of villages near the Fraser River. And it's very likely that that one was actually cultivated and hybridized between the two others because it has exactly the right flavor, not too big seeds. The seeds are not too big, and it's the sweetest of them all. And my daughter, Elizabeth Ignace, is actually currently doing her PhD work to dialogue the DNA science of these different types of Saskatoons with the traditional knowledge that our elders have to throw more light on this. And we have sometimes the knowledge of species and their growing cycles that is embedded in the bird calls that different kinds of bird species use to tell us about plants that are ready for harvesting. And this one here is the meadowlark, which is a common species in our grasslands. And this is what it sounds like. And so the way humans, Secwepemc elders, ancestors, interpreted the call of the meadowlark about this time of year is that the meadowlark sings tu hich jumten kokaila, tu hich jumten kokaila. You wasted my biscuit root on me. And biscuit root is large fruited desert parsley, the plant there with the Swiss Army knife on the top left. And it's an important food plant, but you have to harvest it at just the right time of year. If you leave it too late, it becomes woody and it leaves a tingling sensation in your mouth. So it tells and reminds people, uh, get out there, get harvesting. And kwakila is also an important medicinal plant, and it has interesting story associations um, about a young woman who married one of them a long time ago. Okay, here we go. And another bird species that tells us about the growing of berry plants, of course, is Swainson's thrush, known to Indigenous peoples along the Northwest Coast and interior BC. And it is an ecological indicator species about salmonberry in particular becoming ripe. And it has really interesting terms in different languages of different language families. So in Hatkil, we call it wheat, sorry, wheat, which imitates its call. Uh, and in Haisla, also a way to imitate the song. And then as you turn to interior Salish languages and some coastal Salish languages further south, um, it has its own term in ethnoecology or Balakula. In Secwepemc, it's called jum jum jajum and which is also onomatopoetic. And that term jajum means something like it's on the cusp of getting food to grow. And in Skeetchestn, a Coast Salish language on Vancouver Island, we're being told, or the plants, berry plants are being told, ripen, ripen, ripen by the Swainson's thrush. And so configured into the names of Swainson's thrush in various languages, it either imitates the call or alludes to the food that will be produced if the berries are growing, in which the Swainson's thrush has some kind of role, whether it's an ecological indicator only or whether there's something else going on there by way of interactions, needs to be researched. And finally, we have weather, winds, and cultural burning. The connection between weather formations, human actions like burning the land to renew it, and observations of animals as expressed in narrative. So what I've told you so far are the terms for the animals as ecological indicators, how they sing. And here we also have this in narratives or stories. So in Secwepemc country, we have the story of Secwepemc, the sandhill crane. It's a young girl who longs to be a sandhill crane and to fly with them. So she begs them to take her, and they do, and then she travels with them, always the last one because she wasn't born a sandhill crane. But the significance of the story itself is also they travel through our north-south valley, Skeetchestn, in about mid-April each year, traveling north, and then they travel back in about mid-September of each year on their way south again. And it's during that time of their migration that there's an interesting weather pattern where in the morning you will have a wind blowing from the south, and then around noon, as you get warming temperatures and updrafts, the wind switches by 180 degrees and then blows from north to south. And this produces an ideal pattern of burning, cultural burning, and monitoring, because the fire eventually, by the wind turning, will put itself out. And those are practices that a few people, like my husband, still carry out, but they're also on their way finally coming back. This shows, I know my time is pretty much up here, so I'm just going to go fast through the remaining slides. Ron, my husband, was fortunate to have been taught those practices of burning from his great-grandfather, Edward Ignace, with whom he used to go riding and who defied the bans on burning that came about as a result of industrial forestry. And of course, those types of bans on burning and undermining of the cultural burning that Secwepemc and other people did led, at least in part, to the impacts of the devastating wildfires that we had in 2017 and again in 2021. And so this is what many areas of our forests look like right now. And about more than 50% of our territory, the traditional territory, was destroyed in this fashion. And it'll take a long time to bring back. But restoration, helped by cultural burning, can actually help that purpose. And we have different initiatives, including Amy Christensen and Frank Lake, who have published and created initiatives for training and doing that closer to home. We have the Salish Firekeepers Society that engages our communities in this, and that's really important work. and doing it small scale on our land. We've brought back a couple of species that by biannual burning that just didn't exist on the land anymore. And there are also some interesting initiatives in many different communities throughout British Columbia. This here is in Haida Gwaii, reclaiming the forest gardens adjacent to traditional villages that were abandoned following the smallpox in the 1860s. But we now have initiatives to actually bring back the vegetation, learning about them, and restoring the land. And that is, oops, sorry. Here we go. That's it. Yes, Cookstapko.
Wow. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop share here.
And there is a little time here for questions. And thank you, Marianne, for this wonderful presentation. Sorry.
Lots of hands.
I don't see any hands. So Jessica is the only one I see on my screen. So why don't you start and I'm going to start looking for the hands. And Carrie, I see you next. No, Jessica, you're not talking out. Oh, Carrie O'Hara. Oh, Jessica, there.
I think I was only sending applause hands,
Okay.
but wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I learned so much, Mariana.
Okay, thank you for coming to listen.
Carolina or Carrie before? I think.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this meeting. Francisca and Marianne, is very special for me to listen to this talk as I'm in the process of learning from the land through the people in the Amazon. Everything related to the language and the knowledge specific in relation to species like the birds and the fire and the wind is very similar to what I'm finding over there. So that's very interesting. Yes, just to imagine how people learn to read nature signals, and then that's what I want to focus on, like what you call the ecological indicators. And then I was wishing, yeah, just to hear a little bit more how those are now playing a role in the restoration that you mentioned at the end, like how that revitalization of we learning to read the signals.
Mhm. That sounds really exciting, and all the best with that work. It's important.
Thank you so much. But I was wishing to ask you if you can share a little bit about how this reading the nature signals is being used in the restoration, or just tell us a little bit more about the restoration that is going on around these spaces that you mentioned at the end.
Yeah, so my last, perhaps a little shortened message was cultural burning was in places like interior British Columbia a really a fundamental part of enhancing the growth of berry plants and forage for animals and whatnot. And it was criminalized with the growth of industrial forestry in the first part of the 20th century. And that, of course, then led to younger people no longer being taught how to do that, reading the signs of knowing the winds, knowing what moisture you need to have in the ground because you don't want fires to take off on you, and be able to control them. So it's that traditional knowledge and that plays into being able to do that. And that's where we have increasingly, I mentioned a couple of the individuals and organizations that are working with Indigenous communities to train young people in that knowledge again. This is where also then the sort of people like myself, well, our family burns, but I usually am the one taking the photographs. But we can be the interlocutors too around how that knowledge is reflected in the language. We have, I had it on one of the last slides there, very briefly. We don't think too much about the terms fire and burn, but in our respective Indigenous languages, we might have very different ways of organizing thought around, is it setting fire on purpose? Is it something that burns without volition or somebody setting it on fire? So there's a whole vocabulary or lexicon of how that works and how it's thought of that I think is also important to restore among younger people then learning and relearning the language.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we are on time here. Don't know if anybody wants to say one last word. Anna, I see you now. No.
I just turned it on to say thank you so much for your presentation. I have some thoughts and comments, but nothing urgent, and I really appreciated it. And we may be back in touch in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Francesca has my email, and I think it's actually on the list that gets sent to everybody. So feel free to contact me if we're running out of time right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Such a depth of knowledge and so little that we know. Really, thank you.
Yeah, and I find it to this day, even though we have very few birth speakers of our language left, but learning about more of these intricacies as they come out, it's incredibly exciting. Okay, and on that note, I think I'm being picked up.
Yes, yes.
Go to the Hawaiian Astronomy and Science Center here at the University of Hawaii in Hilo. So thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mariana.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.